In this chapter, we're going to be working with layers and the timeline. Layers allow you to organize a document from front to back, so you can place objects in front of or behind other objects. The most efficient way to organize a group of objects into layers is a command called distribute to layers. So for example, I have a lot of artwork on the stage here. And if I wanted to just select the waves, I have to select them one at a time. So there's several wave elements, and I have to shift-click them all in order to get them all selected and to move them around. It would be more efficient to have these objects all on one layer so I can show or hide them or move them around all at the same time. And that way they don't even have to be grouped, but they're still organized together. So let's look at this distribute to layers command. Select all the artwork on the stage. The easiest way to do that is just to press Command or Control A on your keyboard, the standard select all command. Then right-click somewhere in your selection and choose distribute to layers. Flash then automatically creates layers for each object that you have selected. Some layers are automatically named. Those are the ones that just have shapes on them. So I have layer 2, 3, 4, and all the way through 10. And then some layers with text are actually named for you based on the text in each text field. So we have sea, from, to, and desert, which are all individual text fields, and they get their individual layers, and they're also named automatically by Flash. So using this command, you can easily convert a group of objects that are on one layer into multiple layers that are sometimes named automatically by Flash. The first thing to do to organizing layers is selecting layers to see what content is on the layers. So I have a bunch of unnamed layers here in my file. If I click on each layer once, Flash will automatically select the content on that layer. So when I click on the top layer, that plant in the front will be selected. So I can click on other layers and see what artwork is in those layers. For layers, it's good to have a name that gives an obvious description of the content that the layer contains. So a better name than layer 2 would be something like plant. So let's change the name of the layer by double-clicking the layer name. Now I don't want you to click the layer icon. Just make sure you're double-clicking the name of the layer, and then you can edit the name of the layer. So I'll type plant right here, and now I've named the layer plant. So I can tell what's in that layer by its name. So let's go through the different layers and name them based on what content is in that layer. So I have layer 3 here. I'll double-click the name of the layer and change it to sand. Layer 4, that is water. So I'm going to call that water 1 because there are several different water layers in this file. So we'll call it water 1. Layer 5, that'll be water 2. Layer 6, that'll be water 3. Layer 7, this will be water 4. Layer 8 is the cactus, so we'll call that cactus. Layer 9 will be water 5. Layer 10 is water 6. And these text layers are already named, so we'll skip those. And layer 15 is the background, so I'll just call that BG. Now let's say I wanted to organize all the water layers so I can kind of group them together. You can group layers into something called folders in Flash. So above the water 1 layer, so I'll select the water 1 layer, and then I'll click the folder icon at the bottom left of the timeline to create a new folder. And now I can just drag these layers into that folder, and I have an organized place for all of my water elements. So before I do that, I'm going to double-click the folder name and change the name to water. And then I'm going to select the layers that contain water and click and drag them into the water folder. Notice that when I click and drag into the water folder, the line showing where I'm going to drop the water indents a little bit. That's showing that it's going to go inside of a layer folder. So notice that the layers that are inside the folder are indented. So I'm putting all those water layers in there. Now my water layer is expanded. You can tell by the down arrow to the left of the folder icon. And you can click that arrow and collapse the water layer so I have all the water inside of that water folder. So when you're working with layers, you can double-click a layer's name to change the name of the layer, and you can organize layers into groups by putting them in folders, which can be created by clicking the folder icon at the bottom left of the timeline. Another way to organize your layers is to use a special command in Flash called paste in place. Paste in place simply pastes an object in the same place where you copied it from. So let's take a look at how that works and how to create new layers, and how to organize your layers using that command. So I'm going to select the water 1 layer in the timeline, and I'm going to create a new layer by clicking the new layer button. That's the paper icon in the bottom left of the timeline. So I'll click that button, and then it has the default name of layer 1. So if I double click that name, I'm just going to change its name to water. And I'm going to put all of the water on one layer. So to do that, I'm going to use this paste in place command. So I'll select water 6 layer, and then I'll cut the water out of that layer by pressing Command or Control X. Then I'll select the water layer, and then I'll paste in place with Edit, Paste in Place. Notice the keyboard shortcut is not Command or Control V, it's Shift Command V or Shift Control V on the PC. This is a keyboard shortcut that I use all the time, so I have it memorized, but it might be one that you'll use all the time as well, so I would keep that in mind. So I'll paste it in place, and I put the water on the appropriate layer. So I'm going to go up to layer 5, cut the water from there, and I'm going to use the keyboard shortcut on the water layer to paste in place. So I'll do the same thing with water 4, water 3, water 2, and water 1. So now all my water is on one layer. So I have all these empty layers like water 1 through 4 and then 5 and 6. So I'm actually going to delete them now. So to delete a layer, you just select the layer and then click that trash can icon at the bottom left of the timeline. That's the delete button. So I click that layer and delete it. You can actually select multiple layers and delete them at the same time by shift clicking. So I have water 2 selected. And if I shift click water 4, water 2 through 4 are selected. So I can just delete them all at the same time with the delete button. So I'll just delete 5 and 6. And now I have my water on one layer. Using the tools in the timeline, you can show, hide, and lock layers to help you work more efficiently in Flash. To do that, look under the icons of the eye and the lock in the timeline. Below those icons, you'll see a dot for each layer. So we have a dot for each layer under the eye, and then a dot for the lock. The dot for the eye shows and hides the layer. The dot for the lock locks and unlocks the layer. So for the plant layer, if I click under the eye, it will hide the plant. You'll see a red X showing that that layer is hidden. And if I click again, Flash will show the plant. The lock icon enables you to lock artwork down so it cannot be edited. So let's say I wanted to make it so I can't move the plant around. So right now I can click and drag and edit the plant however I want. But if I click the lock icon and I try to mess with the plant, I can't do it. I'm just messing with artwork behind the plant or in front of the plant. Another feature about showing, hiding, and locking is that you can Option or Alt-click the dot to lock every other layer except for the layer that you click. So if I click the icon for water 1 with the Option key held down, every other layer will be locked, and I can only edit the water 1 layer. So I can select that and I can make any change that I want. This also works for hiding and showing objects. So I can Option click to only show water 1 and everything else is hidden. This feature really comes in handy when you only want to edit or select one object or very few objects. So I locked everything else, and now if I just unlock all the water layers, then I can only select the water. So if I click and drag a selection area around all of the water, I have all of the water selected, and then I could cut it, create a new layer, name the layer water, and paste in place all of the water that I just cut. So it's all organized on one layer. So using these commands, I can quickly and efficiently get around in Flash to organize and to edit my artwork. In Flash, masks reveal a portion of the content in a layer. This is a useful tool for when you're publishing Flash content. If I were to publish this file to the web, the parts of the bridge that come outside of the stage might show, depending on the settings in my HTML file. Let's say I wanted to ensure that they were always hidden. So I only want to reveal the content that is the same width and height and area as the stage. So I'll do that by creating a mask to only reveal that portion of my content. So I'll create a new layer, and I'll name the new layer Mask. When I'm masking content, I want to use a solid color shape, preferably a color that's not used anywhere else in your application. I really prefer bright colors when working with masks, so just in case they're accidentally not set to be masks, they're very obvious to me. So I'm going to choose the rectangle tool. Now, when you're working with a mask in Flash, only the fill matters, so I never use a stroke. So I'm going to get rid of the stroke by selecting the stroke color picker. I'm going to click the No Color button. Then in the fill color picker, I'm going to choose a bright color that's not used here. green will work pretty well. So I have my rectangle tool selected, and instead of trying to draw exactly the same size as the stage, I'm going to draw a rectangle that's any size, and then I'll use the Align panel to set it at the same size as the stage. So I'll use the Selection tool, I'll select the rectangle, open the Align panel, make sure Align to Stage is checked, and then I'm going to click Match Width and Height in the Max Size section. Then the rectangle is the same size as the stage, and then I just want to align it to the center of the stage. So I'll click Align Horizontal Center and Align Vertical Center. So now I have this big green rectangle, and remember in Flash, a mask reveals content. So everything that this rectangle is covering is going to show when this content is published in the Flash player. So to set this layer as a mask and to mask layer 1, I'm going to right-click the mask layer, and then I'm going to choose Mask. And there you go. The bridge on the overflow section of the stage is now hidden by the mask, because the mask didn't cover that portion of the bridge. It only covered the portion of the bridge that's on the stage. You can tell that a layer is a mask layer because it has the mask icon. That's a checkerboard oval with a black background. Layers that are masked by the mask layer have a checkerboard pattern but are rectangular and don't have that black background. Notice that both of these layers are locked. If I unlock either one of them, then I don't see how the mask affects the content. So if you're going to preview a mask inside of Flash, you'll need to lock the mask and all the layers that are being masked. I just want to point out really quick that you can also control masking through the Layer Properties dialog box, which can be opened up by clicking a layer's icon. So this time we're not going to click the layer's name, just the layer's icon. This opens up the Layer Properties dialog. So that was a double click. And now I can change the type of layer. So if I want this mask layer to be a normal layer again, I can click normal. I don't want that for right now, but it's just an option that you can do. So I can edit its name, choose to show or lock the layer, change the outline color of the layer to view it as outlines, or to change the layer height. I'm not going to do any of that right now. I'm just going to click cancel. So that's how you control the masking for a layer. Let's say we wanted to mask multiple layers. To do that, I'm going to unlock layer 1. And I'm going to hide the mask layer. So let's say I wanted to mask the stroke on the outside. So I'll select that stroke on the outside of my artwork, and I'm going to cut the artwork, and I'll create a new layer. And I'll make sure to drag this layer above the mask so it's not masked. You can see the normal layer icon there. And then I'm going to paste the stroke using the Paste in Place command. That's Shift-Command-V or Edit Paste in Place. So now I want to mask this layer, so all I have to do is drag it under the mask, and you can see that the layer placement line indents under the mask, which is telling me that this layer is going to be masked if I release my mouse button here. So I'll release the mouse button, and then layer 3 is then masked by the mask, so I can add multiple layers to the same mask by dragging them just like this. So when you're working with masks, you can reveal content in Flash. Just make sure you're using a solid color shape, and remember, in masks, the strokes don't apply. Using guide layers in Flash can save you a lot on file size, particularly when you're using bitmap images as a guide. In Flash, a guide layer is basically implied in its name. For example, I have this bitmap image on the stage, which I'll explain how to import into Flash in another movie. And let's say I'm tracing the bitmap image to create vector artwork. So I have this flower that I created by using the pen tool and tracing that bitmap image. So really what I want is this vector flower that I created. But I have a guide layer in the background that I used as a guide. So when I publish this content, if I have the guide layer as a regular layer in Flash, for one, that will show in the Flash player, and two, that will greatly increase the file size of my Swift file that I publish. So if I convert this layer to a guide layer, the layer will be thrown out when the file is published. I won't get the file size bloating that I would normally have, and the layer will be hidden. So let's take a look at how to do that. To set a layer as a guide layer, double-click the layer icon to open up the Layer Properties dialog box. So here you'll see we can set the layer's type. One of the types is Guide. So let's select Guide, and then click OK. Notice the layer's icon updates to show the guide icon. To find out the information of the file size of my Swift file with and without using a guide, we'll look at the Swift History section of the Properties panel. So what I'm going to do is actually deselect everything on the stage. I'll show my vector flower that I created in the flower layer. So I'll create my Swift file by choosing Control, Test Movie, Test. So this creates the published version of my Swift file. I'll close that window and look in the Swift history panel. Notice the file size is 1.2 kilobytes. Let's say I turned off that guide layer. I'll double-click the layer icon, set the layer type to normal, and click OK. I'll deselect everything on the stage so I can see the Swift history panel and test the movie one more time. So notice the bitmap image shows, and my file size goes up to 43.9 kilobytes. So I have more file size and the artwork shows, but by using a guide, I can simply have a guide to work with only when I'm in Flash, and that content will not be published in my final Swift file. Sometimes when you're working in Flash, you want to view a layer as just an outline. For example, let's say I wanted to fine-tune this shape that I traced over my guide. It might be better to view the layer as an outline rather than a filled shape. To view a layer as an outline, you click that yellow icon that's under the Show All Layers as Outlines button. I can click to toggle whether that layer appears in outline mode or not. The same keyboard shortcuts apply with the Option or Alt clicking as apply to the showing and hiding and locking of layers. So you can view one layer as outlines and every other layer as a normal layer, or the opposite by Option or Alt clicking. So you'll notice that when I view this layer as outlines, that the outline color is pretty close to the color of the flower, so it's kind of hard to see. So let's say I wanted to adjust that outline color. I can do that in the Layer Properties menu. So I'll double-click the flower layer icon to open up the Layer Properties dialog box, and here I can change the layer's outline color. So I'll click that color picker. I want to use something that's a bright color that's not anywhere near the color of the flower or anything next to the flower. So I'll pick a teal color here. So I'll pick that color and click OK, and now I can see the outline of my layer. So I can get in there and fine-tune my shape to better match my guide. So by using outlines, you can more easily work in Flash and get a different perspective when you're manipulating artwork. In this chapter, we'll look at working with the library and bringing images into Flash. First, we'll talk about the library panel. The library panel stores all of your reusable assets in Flash. So if you don't see the library panel, you can go to Window, Library to open it up. You can memorize the keyboard shortcut if you like, but I don't use this keyboard shortcut because I always have the library open. So in the library, you can see a bunch of different objects, and if you click on them, you'll see a preview in the preview area. So I can see all these different assets. And the library enables you to save and organize your assets in Flash. So if I want to organize them by name, I can click this name area in the library, and they'll be organized by name. If I expand the library horizontally, I can organize the library items by the use count or the date modified. I'll shrink the library down again. In the library, you can create different folders to organize your content. So if I click the folder icon at the bottom of the library panel, I can create a new folder. I can give it a name like Background Elements. And then I can organize different assets by putting them inside of that folder. So I'll click and drag the logo inside of the Background Elements folder, and I'll drop the bridge in there as well. So now I have an organized area of the library with my folder. You can delete library items by clicking the Delete button. You can create new library items by clicking the New Symbol button. We'll talk about creating symbols in another movie. And you can look at properties for each item by clicking the Properties button. That's the little icon with the eye on it. So if I select the biker symbol, for example, and click the Properties button, I'll see properties for that object, and so on. So again, the library organizes your content. If you have multiple objects open, you can actually go between libraries through the drop-down menu in the library panel. So you can see that I'm working in library.fla right now. If I click the drop-down menu, I can go to library2.fla, and that actually changes my library, not my FLA file. So I'm still working in library, but I'm looking at the library file too. So I can take assets from another FLA file and then drop them into my current file. I'll undo that change. You can also open an FLA file as a library. So if I close Library 2, I can go to File, Import, Open External Library. I can then find my file, which is Library 2, and that file is then opened as an external library. So I can get assets from that file as well. Another thing you can do with the library is click the button to open up a new library. That's at the very top right of the library panel. So I can open up a new library, and that way I have multiple library panels, and I can go between them in this way. You can also click the pin button to pin a library as you move through different FLA files. So you're looking at one library as you tab through multiple FLA files. Let's take a look at an example of that. I'll open up that library2 file again. I'm not using open external library this time. I'm actually just using the regular open command. And I'll open up library2. And so let's say I'm going to be moving back and forth between library and library2. But I want to have my library.fla library open all the time. So I can click the pin button, and then you'll see that the library does not change when I move from one file to another. So by using the library panel, you can keep your assets in Flash organized. You can organize them into folders, by name, by use count, and many other ways so that you can work effectively in Flash. Flash can import several different bitmap image file types. This includes, but is not limited to, the common web image file types like JPEG, GIF, and PNG files. Note that PNG files support full transparency in Flash. Let's take a look at how to import an image into Flash. There are two different ways to import an image. You can import an image directly to the library by going to File, Import, Import to Library. I'm going to import the file, flower.jpg, and click Open. The file is then in the library, and when I click on the image in the library, I see the preview in the library panel. I could then click and drag the bitmap from the library onto the stage. I'm going to undo that and delete the flower from the library, and we'll look at another method for importing bitmaps into Flash. You can go to File, Import, Import to Stage. This brings the bitmap image into the library and automatically places it on the stage. Usually, this is going to be the option that you'll choose. So you may want to remember the keyboard shortcut if you plan on working with bitmap images in Flash. So I'll import the flower, and there it is on the stage. Let's say you imported a bitmap image into Flash, and then you made a change to that image outside of Flash, and you wanted that update reflected in Flash. Let's take a look at how that works. In the library, I have this file called flower.jpg, and you see the flower on the stage. If I go over to Photoshop, and let's say I made this image black and white, so I can go to Image, Adjustments, Black and White. I'm just going to use the default settings, and then I'll save the file. Note that I'm saving over the original file. So if you're going to do this, just make sure you save a copy of the original somewhere else. So I'll save the file. I'm not worried about the settings for this example, so I'm just going to click OK to accept the default settings, and then I'll tab back over to Flash. So the original file has been updated, but Flash is still showing the color version. To update the file, I'm going to right-click flower.jpg in the library, and then select Update. Here, there's a list of my library items, and I can select which ones I want to update. Since I only have one, and the box is checked, all I need to do is click Update to update the file. You can see that the flower on the stage is updated, and if I click the Close button, then the flower in the library is updated as well. So using this Update option, you can edit images outside of Flash, and provided they're in the same location that they were when you imported them into Flash, you can update the changes quickly and easily by right-clicking and choosing Update. One of the great things about Flash and bitmap images is that you can adjust the compression without messing with the original image file. Once the file is imported into Flash, that original file's information is saved in Flash, and however you change the compression of the file is never affected, and you can always undo any changes that you make without losing image quality. Let's take a look at how to modify bitmap image compression in Flash. So if I test my movie, I'll go to Properties, and I'll test the movie in Flash, publish a SWF file, and take a look at its file size in the SWF history panel. To publish the movie, I'll go to Control, Test Movie, Test. I'll close the file, and then look in the SWF history section in the Properties panel. Note the file size is 69 kilobytes. By adjusting compression, I can lower that file size a little bit while still retaining the quality of the image. So let's go to the library, and I'll double-click the icon for flower.jpg to open up the bitmap properties window. In the bitmap properties window, you'll see a preview of your image that you can click and drag to pan around. And then you'll see some settings that you can update. Many of these settings deal with the compression of your image. You can check Allow Smoothing to have Flash smooth out the image to reduce its file size. Now sometimes this will make your image look a little bit better, but if you compress it a lot, then maybe it won't look so good. So just know that you might want to toggle this and see how it looks when you're compressing your images. After that, you'll see the compression drop-down menu. You can choose whether to use JPEG compression or lossless compression. Basically, JPEG compression compresses the image by reducing its quality. So the file size goes down with the quality. Lossless compression doesn't have any compression settings and maintains the original image. So if you want to compress the image, you can go to JPEG compression, and then you can either use the imported JPEG data or choose custom to set your own compression. So with custom, I have it set to 50. I'm going to change this to 25 so that the difference is very obvious between the original and the compressed version, and then I'll click Test to watch the image update. Before you click Test, make sure you're looking at the image preview in the left side of this window. So I'll click Test, and there's the compressed image. So that's an enormous reduction in quality, so we don't want that. So I'll go a little bit higher. I'll go to 50 and click Test, and that looks a little bit better. Now you may want to do it higher than this, or this may be okay. It's really your call. I'll go to 60 and click Test, and that looks good to me, so I'll click OK. And then I'm going to go to the Properties panel, deselect everything, test the movie one more time. There's the image. I'll close the window, and notice that my file size is about half the size as it was before. So by adjusting the settings for this bitmap image, I was able to bring down the file size of my Swift file. When you're working with many bitmap images in Flash, I recommend going through them one by one so that you can optimize your file to get the lowest file size possible. In Flash, you can break apart a bitmap image to the pixel level and manipulate that using the lasso tool. In this movie, we'll take a look at how to use the lasso tool and its various settings in Flash. So on the stage here, I have a bitmap image. Now, if I select it, you can see that it's a bitmap in the Properties panel. To break it apart, I'm going to go to Modify, Break Apart. Note the keyboard shortcut is Command B. So this converts this object into a shape. And so I can edit this object just like any other vector shape in Flash. So if I click and drag the side, I can bring it in and modify the object however I want. I'm going to undo those changes, and we'll take a look at the lasso tool. So with the lasso tool, you have basically two modes. One mode is the lasso mode, and the other mode is the magic wand mode. So let's look at the magic wand mode first. I'm going to uncheck polygon mode in the options area of the toolbar. That's below everything else at the bottom. And I'm going to click the magic wand settings button. So here I can choose the threshold and smoothing for the magic wand. The magic wand allows you to click a color inside of a bitmap shape to select all contiguous colors. Now, of course, this setting isn't perfect, but you can customize it using the threshold and smoothing options. So I'm going to leave the threshold at 50 and leave the smoothing at smooth. So you can come back and change these if you want to experiment more with the magic wand tool. But I'm going to click OK, and then I'm going to click the button to turn on magic wand mode in the toolbar. So I'm going to click one of the petals and watch how Flash selects it because that yellow color is contiguous. So if I click the selection tool and I move the shape around, you'll see that I have a fairly clean selection of the petals at the top of the flower. So using the magic wand tool, I can get a pretty nice selection of bitmap images after I break them apart. Now let's look at the other settings of the lasso tool. I'm going to uncheck magic wand, and then I'm going to draw with the regular lasso tool. So if I click and drag around a petal and release my mouse button approximately where I started, I can select a petal. This setting is actually kind of difficult to get a really clean selection because your hand may move as you're moving around your mouse. But nonetheless, it's an option when you're selecting objects with the lasso tool. The polygon mode setting gives you a little bit more control when you're selecting objects with the lasso tool. It allows you to click multiple times to create a selection. So if I click, my selection continues to expand each time I click. When you're using the polygon mode, I recommend getting small portions of your selection and then closing out your selection. So I started up here at the top left of that pedal, and once I finish at the top left of this pedal, I'm going to close out my selection by double-clicking. So I'll double-click, and then I have my selection. And now what I'm going to do is hold the Shift key on my keyboard, and then use the polygon tool by clicking again on the next pedal to add to that last selection. So when you hold the Shift key and you click, you're actually adding to the selection. So once I select this pedal and double-click to finish, then that selection is added to my previous selection. So by using this pattern, I can actually go through the whole flower and get the whole thing selected to isolate it from the rest of this bitmap image. Here's an example of what you can do using the polygon mode of the lasso tool. I actually took this shape and cleaned it up using the eraser tool. So when you're working in Flash, you can use the lasso tool to select parts of a bitmap and isolate them from the rest of the image. Of course, the advantage to that method is using Photoshop's lasso tool, which has more controls, and the advantage to this method with the lasso tool in Flash is that you'll have less file size when you export your movie from Flash. Using the color panel, you can apply a bitmap image as a fill to a shape. On the stage here, I have a vector shape. So I'll open the color panel, and then for the color type drop-down, I'm going to choose bitmap fill. So you'll notice that the shape is filled with a bitmap image, but it doesn't quite line up. So what I'm going to do is use the gradient transform tool to align the bitmap fill to my shape. So I'll select the gradient transform tool. In the center of the bitmap fill, I'll click and drag to move the bitmap fill to align with the shape. And there you have it. The advantage to that is that your vector path is always editable, so you can continue refining it once you've created it. And I can use a JPEG image instead of a PNG file, which will allow me to compress the file to get better file size when I output my movie from Flash. In Flash, you can actually take a bitmap image and turn it into a vector image. Now, this is great because you can create stylized artwork, but also, once a bitmap image is vectorized, you can scale it up and scale it down without losing any quality in the image. So let's look at how to do that. Select your bitmap image on the stage, and then use the Trace Bitmap command to convert it into a vector graphic. To do that, go to Modify, Bitmap, Trace Bitmap. Here, you can adjust the color threshold and minimum area to control how complex the colors are inside of your shape. So the higher values mean a less complex shape, and lower values mean a more complex shape. Keep in mind that if you have a very complex vector shape, it could slow down the Flash player much more than a bitmap image. So you don't want to go crazy in making this image very complex as a vector graphic. So I'm actually going to change the color threshold down to 50. I'm going to leave the minimum area at 8. And then I can determine how the colors will be created when this object is vectorized. I'm just going to leave the normal setting. And I can show how the curves are going to be rendered. So if I want more curves, I can choose very smooth, or less curves, I can choose pixels. I'm just going to choose normal to leave the default setting. Then I'm going to click the preview button to see what this bitmap image looks like as a vector graphic. That looks good, so I'll click OK. And now I have a vector graphic from that bitmap image. So I can actually click on the shapes and move them around and select them just like any other vector shapes in Flash. So by using the Trace Bitmap tool in Flash, you can take a bitmap image and turn it into vector artwork that is completely scalable without losing any quality whatsoever. Flash CS5 introduces a new text layout engine called the Text Layout Framework. Before Flash CS5, some of this functionality was available only through plugins and ActionScript code. Now it's built directly into Flash. In this movie, we'll look at the Text Layout Framework and some of the settings that you'll need in order to use the Text Layout Framework. When you're using the Text Layout Framework, you need to target Flash Player 10 or above and ActionScript 3.0. You can set this when you create a new document in Flash. So when you go to File, New, you can choose ActionScript 3.0, and that will automatically create a Flash Player 10 file. And if you have another file that's targeted with Flash Player 9, for example, you can change that in your Publish Profile settings. So you can go to File, Publish Settings, go to Flash, and then choose Flash Player 10 for the player. Then when you're done, you can click OK. On the stage here, I have some text. If I select the text with the selection tool You can see in the Properties panel that it's called TLF Text. The drop-down menu that says TLF Text allows you to choose the text engine when you're working in Flash. If I click on the drop-down menu, you'll see that there's also Classic Text. We'll talk more about Classic Text in another movie. There are 3 different types of text layout framework text. There's read-only, selectable, and editable. All of these do what their name implies. So read-only cannot be selected or edited. Selectable text is selectable in the Flash player. It's not editable though. And editable text can be edited in the Flash player. So this is used for something like forms. So that's a brief introduction to the text layout framework. The main thing I want you to take away at this point is that you can control what text engine you use in the Properties panel, and to use the text layout framework, you need to target Flash Player 10 and ActionScript 3.0. You can create text in Flash by using the text tool. In this movie, we'll look at using the text tool to create text layout framework style text. So on the stage here, I have some artwork and I'm going to add text to it. I'll do that by selecting the text tool in the toolbar. And then for the text engine in the Properties panel, I'll choose TLF Text. And for the text type, I'm going to choose Read Only. Read Only is a good option if you're doing text for something like a logo that you don't want to be selected. And before I start writing, I'm going to make sure that I'm using horizontal text. That's the orientation dropdown right next to the text type dropdown at the top of the Properties panel. And then in the Characters section, I'm going to choose Adobe Caslon Pro for my font. If you don't have that font, feel free to use anything you'd like. And then I'm going to leave everything at the default except for the paragraph align setting, which I'm going to set to justify with last line aligned to center. I'll click at the bottom center of the stage, and I'm going to write taste of, and then I'm going to create a new line by pressing the return key or enter key, and I'm going to type California. And to stop typing in Flash, you press escape on the keyboard. So that gets me out of text editing mode. And then I can use the selection tool and move the text around. I'm going to move the text up a little bit, and it looks a little off-centered, and rather than just eyeballing it, I'm going to use the align tool and just align it to the center of the stage. So there's my text. Now we'll go over some of the other settings for the text layout framework. Keep in mind that I'm not going to demonstrate every single setting for the text layout framework in this movie. I'm just going to show you the most common ones that you'll be using when you're working in Flash. So I have my text selected. I'm going to scroll down. And in the character setting, there is leading and tracking. Leading specifies the space between lines. So as I click and drag this back and forth, you can see California moving up and down. Tracking specifies the space between letters. So as I click and drag, you can see more space or less space between letters. Kerning controls the different space between letters based on the letter. Some fonts have information about how each letter should fit with each other letter. And so kerning controls that, and you can set it to auto or on or off. Most of the time you're going to want auto set. You're really only going to mess with this if letters kind of look weird at displaying in Flash. So I really just leave that on auto for the most part. Anti-aliasing allows you to control how text is anti-aliased. That means how it's smoothed. So you can choose for readability, which is better for smaller fonts, or animation, which is better for larger fonts. We'll talk about device fonts in another movie. You can also set the text field rotation and some other style settings like underline, strike through, superscript, and subscript. In the advanced characters section of the Properties panel, you can control things like a link. If you wanted this text to link to a URL, you can put the URL in right here. You can specify the case of the text, and this is actually pretty useful because I would like my text right now to be all uppercase, so I can set it like that. Then you can set the case for digits, so I can specify how the digits line up across the baseline of the text and how digits are spaced apart using digit width. Dominant and alignment baseline are settings for Asian text, so I'm going to skip over that for now. You can control how ligatures are displayed, with minimum displaying no ligatures and exotic displaying the most ligatures. You can control how the lines break. So I can break with each character, or I can break based on the width of the text field. I'm just going to choose auto for there. I can move the baseline of the text. You can change the paragraph alignment. And there's different settings for justifying the lines of text. So when you justify the text, you can decide how the last line is displayed. And then you can justify all lines. I'm going to go back to justify with last line aligned to center. You You can control margins and spacing before paragraphs. You can choose to justify text using letters or words. And then when you have multi-line text, you can choose whether text wraps around multiple lines when you have a text box, or you can choose whether it's just a single line and it never creates a new line. With the text layout framework, you can create columns of text and space the columns. You can control the padding inside of the text field. And if you click the link button, you can keep the padding uniform with left, right, top, and bottom padding all being the same. I'm going to set the padding back to 0. You can control border color of the text and a background fill color. I'm going to set both of those to no color right now. And those are the main settings you're going to be working with the text layout framework. So let's say you wanted to do something practical, like make both of these lines of text take up the same amount of width in the text field. To do that, I'm just going to shrink the font size of the text that says California. So I'm going to double click inside of the text field to enter text editing mode, and then I'm going to double click the word California. You can see now that it's highlighted inside of the text box. So I'm going to click and drag the size dropdown until California is the same size as taste of. And I'll release my mouse button, and there's my text. Now if I want to make sure that it's aligned to the bottom rectangle, I can select the bottom rectangle, shift-click the text, and then use the Align panel to make sure they're aligned. Before I do that, I'm going to make sure I uncheck Align to Stage. So I'm going to align the horizontal and vertical centers, and there is the text on the stage with my artwork. So to use the text layout framework, use the text tool, choose TLF text, and you can justify all of your settings in the Properties panel. In Flash, there are two different types of text fields. There are fixed width text fields and variable width text fields. On the stage here, I have some text, which I'll select with the selection tool. To tell whether your text is fixed width or variable width, double-click your text to enter text editing mode. When you're in text editing mode, look at the bottom right of your text field. If you see a circle, then that is a variable width text field. Variable width text fields expand horizontally as you add more text. So if I add more text after California, you'll see the text field expands horizontally. I'll press Escape now to exit text editing mode. Now let's say you wanted to create a variable width text field. All you have to do is use the text tool and then click on the stage and begin typing. Now I'll undo that text field. Now let's look at fixed width text fields. A fixed width text field anchors the width of the text, and the height of the text field expands as you add more text. To convert a variable width text field into a fixed width text field, double-click the text field to enter text editing mode, and then double-click the circle at the bottom right of the variable width text field. Notice the text field updates to have squares on the left and on the right. This shows that I'm working in a fixed width text field. Notice that when I changed from a variable width text field to a fixed width text field, that the square at the top right has red lines inside of it. This is a visual cue that the text field has overflow text. So I'm going to need to expand the width or height of the text field to get that text in there. So this time I'm going to expand the width of the text field since I don't want the A on California to be on a separate line. So I'm going to click and drag at the right edge. See these boxes around the text field? There are 8 boxes around that you can click and drag to change the size of the text field. So the ones at the top and bottom expand the height, the ones at the left and right expand the width, and the ones at the corners expand width and height. I'm going to drag the handle on the right to fit all that text in there. You can see that the box at the top right is updated to have a white inside. I'm going to press Escape to exit text editing mode, and we'll look at how to create a fixed width text field using the text tool. I'm going to deselect the text on the stage, and then I'm going to go to the text tool, and to create a fixed width text field, I'm going to click and drag a text area. So instead of just clicking once, you click and drag, and you can specify the width of your text field. So I have my text field now, and as I type text in it, you'll see that the text field does not expand horizontally. Rather, the overflow goes vertical. So if I click and drag the text to expand it vertically, it can accommodate all the text that I've written inside of the text field. I'm just going to undo creating that text field. So using fixed and variable width text fields, you can customize the presentation of your text in Flash. One of the most exciting features about the text layout framework is the ability to make text flow through multiple text fields. We'll take a look at how to do that in this movie. On the stage here, I have a text field on the left, which has overflow text, as you can see, with that red box at the bottom right. What we're going to do is make this text flow through the empty text boxes at the top right of the stage. These empty text boxes can be created by simply creating a fixed width text field and not typing any text inside of it. So you click and drag a text area and then press escape before typing any text. So the visual representation of that is a dashed blue line. So what we're going to do is click on that overflow icon, which is the red box at the bottom right of this text field, and then hover over anywhere on the stage. Notice if you hover outside of a text field, you'll see an icon showing that Flash will create a new text field for you if you click. So you can actually click anywhere you want, and Flash will create a new text field for you and automatically flow the overflow text into that text field. I'm actually going to undo that change, and instead of creating a new text field, we'll just flow into the ones that already exist. To do that, click in that red overflow box, then hover over a text field, and your cursor will update to show a chain link, indicating that if you click that text field, Flash will continue the flow of the original text field into that field. So I'll click here, and Flash continues the flow, and you can see that there's a red box showing there's still more overflow text. So I'll click there, then click in the next text field, and I'll click at the bottom right of that text field, and then finally click in the last text field to extend the whole amount of text. Now, it's still showing me a red box here, but there really isn't any more text. It's just Flash just wants a little bit more space to display it. So I'm actually going to click and drag to expand this text vertically, and then that red box will go away. And now that you've established flow between text fields, if you ever want to unlink them, you can just double-click that arrow at the top left of the text field, and Flash will automatically unlink that text field from the previous one. So I'll reestablish the connection by clicking the red box and then clicking inside of the empty text field. So by using this new feature of the text layout framework, you have more control over the design in your applications, and it's easy to link text through multiple text fields. The text layout framework supports more languages than the classic text engine, including better support for Asian languages and right-to-left languages. To see the settings for Asian and right-to-left languages, select a text field on the stage, or click on the text tool in the toolbar and go to the Properties panel. In the Properties panel, click the flyout menu at the top right to expand options for the Properties panel. In that menu, you'll see checkboxes for Asian options and right-to-left options, so you can enable or disable those options when you're creating text fields. Enabling these options adds more options to the Properties panel when you're working with a text field. So as you scroll down, you'll see extra options in advanced character for Asian languages like dominant baseline and alignment baseline. And then you'll be able to set right to left in the direction area in the paragraph section of the Properties panel. So I can check right to left or left to right. So using these new options in Flash, you have better support than ever before for Asian and right to left languages. When you deploy your application created in Flash, sometimes the text in the text field will not render properly because the person viewing that text does not have the same font installed on their computer. One of the ways to overcome that design barrier is to embed a font inside of your Swift file so that regardless of whether your user has that font, they will still see the design you intended when they view your application. So on the stage here, I have some text that I rotated using the settings in the Properties panel. And I'm going to embed this font since I'm using Adobe Caslon Pro. It's safe to assume that not everybody has Adobe Caslon Pro, so this is a good candidate for a font to embed. To embed the font, select it on the stage, and then click the Embed button in the Character section of the Properties panel. This opens up the Font Embedding window. In the Font Embedding window, I can add a name for a font that I want to embed. The default name is going to be Font 1, which doesn't really tell me what font this is. So here I like to use names that describe the font I'm using rather than something like headline font or title font. So I'm going to type Adobe Caslon, semi-bold. So I have named the text, And then in the character ranges section, I'm going to choose which glyphs I want to embed. Since my text is fairly simple and it's only going to be letters, I'm going to embed all uppercase and lowercase letters only. I'm not going to check the boxes to embed numerals, punctuation, and I'm certainly not going to check the all box because that will embed all the characters, and you can see that 341 glyphs, whereas I have 53 estimated glyphs if I just embed the uppercase and lowercase letters. What that really means is that vector outlines are being embedded into my Swift file, and so the less glyphs I embed, the lower my file size, the faster the application loads, etc. So you want to embed as few as possible, but you want to make sure that you cover everything you're actually going to use in that text field. So I've set all my embed settings, and then I'll just click OK to embed the font. Now when I publish this application, anybody that sees it will see the exact same font that I used when I created the application, whether or not they have that font installed on their system. One alternative to embedding fonts and keeping the file size of your applications low is something called device fonts. Device fonts use fonts that are already on the device that's viewing your application, so you don't have to embed the font. Now, the downside of this is that you have less power over the presentation of your application, but the upside is the font will display properly every time. So you'll never have a case where the font doesn't display at all. So that's a good thing. Let's select the text on the stage and take a look at how we can use device fonts in Flash. Device fonts are actually in the character section in the anti-alias dropdown. So if I click that drop-down menu, I can choose Use Device Fonts. Now, if I use device fonts, the best thing to do to preserve the design from my application, whether it's viewed on any other machine, is to use the special fonts that are at the very top of the character menu. So I'm going to click the character drop-down and scroll to the very top, and you'll see three fonts that start with an underscore. There's underscore sans, underscore serif, and underscore typewriter. Now these fonts are extremely simple fonts, but you can rest assured that they will render on any device you deploy your application to. So I'm going to choose underscore sans for this example. And that gives me a sans serif font. And maybe that's not the best way to preserve the appearance of my application. So I'm actually going to choose underscore serif instead. Now that's pretty close to what I originally created. And so any device I deploy this application to, whether it's a mobile phone or some other device that has the Flash player, including a computer, the application will render the text using the device's default serif font. So this is going to preserve the appearance of my text, and I'm not going to have to embed it, so my file size will remain low. So again, to use device fonts, all you need to do is select a text field on the stage, and then set the Use Device Font setting in the Anti-Alias dropdown in the Properties panel. If your main concern when you're designing an application using Flash is the appearance of your text, the best way to preserve that appearance is to break the text apart into vector outlines. Keep in mind that when you do this, the text will no longer be editable as text. That's a pretty big disadvantage. So this is really for when you really want to preserve the appearance of the text over its editability. So on the stage here, I have some text selected. The command I'm going to use to take this text and convert it to vector shapes is modify, break apart. You'll notice that we've used this command repeatedly throughout this title, and that's why I recommend memorizing the keyboard shortcut, because this is a very useful way to ungroup shapes, to break apart bitmap images, and to convert text to outlines. So I choose that command, and now in the Properties panel you can see that I have a bunch of drawing objects selected. So these are actually now shapes and not editable text. So I can actually edit them just as if I were editing any other shape in Flash. So to convert text to outlines in Flash, select the text field and then choose Modify, Break Apart, or use the keyboard shortcut Command or Control B. In Flash CS5, the text layout framework is the preferred method for working with text. However, there are some situations where you won't be able to use the text layout framework. I mentioned earlier in this chapter that the text layout framework needs to use Flash Player 10 and ActionScript 3.0. For some projects, you may have to publish to an earlier version of the Flash Player or an earlier version of ActionScript. In those situations, you cannot use the text layout framework, so you'll have to use the classic text engine. So for that purpose, I'm going to briefly cover how to use the classic text engine in Flash. So on the stage here, I have some text layout framework text. I'm going to select it, and then I'm going to convert this to classic text by using the drop-down menu for text engine at the top of the properties panel. So I'll change the engine to classic text, and you can see that the font renders a little bit differently. I use the text layout framework to auto-capitalize all the text. Now, since that setting is not available in classic text, I'll have to manually capitalize all of this text. So I can use caps lock and type Taste of California. I'll press the Escape key. I'll select the California text. I'll shrink down the text of California a little bit, and then I'll select Taste of, and I'll expand that size of that text a little bit. So now Taste of matches the width of California. You'll notice that most of the settings in classic text are the same as text layout framework. There's just less settings that you can change. One thing to note is how Flash shows a fixed width text field in classic text. If I double click inside of the text field, you'll see that there's a box at the top right. So that indicates fixed width. If I double click the box, it converts to variable width. And notice that you'll see a circle there. So it's the same as the text layout framework. It's just at the top instead of at the bottom. There's one more thing to demonstrate in classic text, and that's the text field types. So there's static text, dynamic text, and input text. Static text is for text you just want to display in Flash, and it can be made selectable. Dynamic text is made primarily for text that can be edited using ActionScript code, and input text is used in forms because it's editable. So again, the text layout framework is the preferred method, but you can switch to classic text if you have to target a lower version of the Flash player or ActionScript by selecting a text field and choosing the classic text engine in the properties panel.